Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Mike and Norm, Law and Legitimacy. While you were resting this weekend, the world tilted off its axis, and boy, I don't know what happens next. I woke up. My wife is the ever vigilant consumer of news. Me, I just kind of wander through the day, waiting for the next 2x4 to hit me in the head. So Saturday morning, I'm up. There's major developments in Israel. There's conflict. I'm like, I just woke up. Conflict is perpetual in Israel. Can we have some? Let me have some coffee first. Settled into the papers over the weekend, and wow, just wow. I mean, Hamas organized a Yom Kippur attack the day after, the most concerted, widespread attack on Israel in 50 years. Benjamin Netanyahu has declared that Israel is at war with Hamas, and as we speak, artillery is pounding in that region of the world. Hundreds of people are dead, both Palestinians and Israelis. Apparently, Hamas had infiltrated Israel and then stormed Israel, attacking residents in their homes, shooting people on the streets, blowing things up, taking captives, including apparently a grandmother and children, back into the Gaza Strip. Israel has responded with force, as well it should. And it leaves the rest of the world watching and wondering what can be done. And will there ever be peace in that region? I mean, from my perspective, I always play if I were involved in that situation, what would I do? And I think I would just leave Israel, if I were a Jewish person. And I was joking with a friend this morning. I guess I'd leave Israel and move to New York, but I don't know that New York's much better these days. Obviously, there's not open violence, at least not yet. So I have friends who have family in Israel, and they're very concerned about their family members. And it's a grim day. It's a grim day. I don't know what the solution is. I know that the creation of Israel as a modern state has always been controversial. In the late 19th century, Israel was part of the British, or the area of Palestine was part of the British Empire, and it was earlier under the sway of the Ottoman Turks. It developed independence along the way as part of the Balfour Declaration, giving England suzerainty over the territory for a while. And then in the wake of, and in the lead up to the Second World War and the Holocaust, Zionists looked to create a Jewish homeland, a Jewish home state. They went into the territory. The British opposed the migrations. One of the famous acts of terrorism in the region was Benjamin, oh gosh darn it, Menachem Begin's participation in a terrorist group that blew up the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, in part to tell British, hands off, let us be. And so a modern secular Jewish state was created and declared its independence in 1948, and has fought a series of bloody conflicts with its neighbors, who threatened to drive them into the sea. I've always been sympathetic to Israel, and remain so, but not deaf to the claims of the Palestinians in the area. These were folks who were displaced from their homes, and have lived now for decades in refugee camps. When I think of those refugee camps, though, I think that a lot of the blood on the soil in the Middle East right now is on the hands of the Arab states. They've permitted people to live for generations now in refugee camps as a way of expressing their hostility to Israel. And instead of spreading that oil wealth around and making a home for people of similar ethnicity and religion, they've manipulated them and kept them as a strategic pawn on Israel's border, with the hope perhaps that someday things would erupt to the point that Israel would be forced no longer to exist. And clearly, that's what's at stake here. There are those who think that Iran may be behind Hamas. I think a significant tell will be what happens on the northern border of Israel, in the area of the Golan Heights, because Iran is also a backer of Hezbollah, a group of displaced people in that region, who oppose Israel. So it's tense times, Mike. I watched this. And I can't help but wonder about the ripple effect in the world in general. And I can't help but wonder how China is going to react to this. And well, here's why. In recent months, Israeli society has been torn apart by proposed reforms of its Supreme Court's role in Israeli life. It lacks a written constitution of the form of the United States Constitution, and therefore its doctrine of judicial review is a little bit different. However, the Israeli Supreme Court has the ability to set laws aside. Benjamin Netanyahu has been seeking broad reform of the Israeli judicial system to minimize the role of the court in Israeli life as a sort of populist gesture. In other words, the will of the people should be reflected in acts of government, and the Supreme Court is not a popular entity. This has led to did lead to massive resignations from the volunteer military force by people claiming that Netanyahu was trying to force a change on Israel that would change the character of the society. And they openly wondered whether this was a society worth defending. Is it possible that that level of discord led to others to think, this might be a good time to strike? Now, suddenly, members are flocking back to the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, because nothing unifies a country like an external threat. But you can't help but wonder whether there's not a center there that most Israelis care to share and hold, and whether the Arab world sensed weakness. The parallel to China and Taiwan and the American support of Taiwan is obvious. We're a deeply divided country now. Judicial review is among the topics that divide us. When you think about the reaction to the affirmative action cases, the reaction to the Dobbs versus women's health, the abortion decision, when you think of the broader crisis of legitimacy in the United States and our stake as a stakeholder in world institutions and in world governance, will our adversaries see our internal weakness as an opportunity to strike? And if they do, will we be able to summon the will effectively to respond? I'll be watching Israel as a test case of that. And I will also be watching Hamas's reaction to Israel as a tell of what's to come. Violence is part of politics, and Hamas is seeking to use violence to impose its will on Israel. There are those in American society who would use violence, or who believe that their voices are not heard. Will they see in Hamas an illustration of more aggressive tactics that might work? As I watched one part of a city in Israel burn, I couldn't help but think of the summer of 2020 and the BLM protests. No justice, no peace. And we had mostly peaceful protests that turned violent, but we didn't have the sort of interpersonal, direct violence that we've now seen in Israel. How far are we from that in the United States? I wonder as I watch the flames in Israel this weekend. And I don't have an answer.
Yeah, Norm, I have a little bit of an answer, but I guess it's more of some meandering inquiry mixed with.
So I was to the point there the last 8 minutes.
Yeah. And mixed with some observations. I guess you expressed that your wife informed you Saturday morning, and so began your foray into figuring out to the best of your ability what happened or what was going on. It was late Friday night that I was met with this stuff, and it was based on Twitter, X. And then my Saturday morning, I think I sent something to you that was sent to me that was 50 years to the day, where the images of war on the Golan Heights was seen by the world, the modern world at that time in 1983. 73. So it would have been 50 years to the day. And what followed for me was tracking the chronology of events, as it were. What X was able to do is really quickly identify journalists or people in the know who were aggregating images and videos coming out of Israel and curating those into a thread. And those, following them or following the thread were able to introduce more information. So it's a fallible scenario, but I think that something for us to consider, that over the last decade or so, the populist movement in the West that is known as sort of the political right, the populist right, has risen in large part due to the deterioration in integrity of Western media, of establishment media, of trust fund media. And what we have today, in contrast to what we've had over the last several months, is real on the ground images of a war in the Middle East. And I say that's in contrast to the last several months. It's because of what's going on in Ukraine, right? Oh, Ukraine by contrast is something of a black box. It's very opaque, right? The figures, depending on what source of news you get, your figures as to who is necessarily winning, quote unquote, that war, how many have perished, where our funds from the United States are actually going, to what end, etc. There is a certain kinetic energy around the stuff with Israel that is very easy to distinguish from any of the energy around what's going on in Ukraine, or what appears to be going on in Ukraine, or otherwise what we have been told is going on in Ukraine. And I bring that up just to say that you said, we will be watching. My concern, Norm, is that modern warfare is really it's a fractal of it is fractal in nature. We are no longer in the era where we have long since left the era of traditional warfare that we might see in movies, right? Mel Gibson and the Patriot, and that's not news. But we're a far cry from where we were in the first Gulf War, and then we're also a far cry from where we were when the United States re-entered Afghanistan and into Iraq during the Bush years, the second Bush years. And what that means for me is that when I'm looking at these images of war and attacks over on X over the weekend, I'm seeing things like retail off-the-shelf drones being used to drop, any manner of bombs, right? And just hovering over tanks. It's just very, very simple. I've got an image of someone using, I think it was like a glider, a motorized glider, gliding into Israel from the strip, from Gaza Strip, and we're watching this stuff happen in real time, and it blows me away because we have been conditioned to think that war occurs in other areas. But what we have also seen over the last several years, Norm, are these seemingly arbitrary but very kinetic and easily catalyzed riots and anything all over our country. And we don't necessarily understand the role of social media and the internet in creating that. But what in the last month or so, we've seen New York and Philadelphia New York City and Philadelphia, respectively, deal with their own sort of very strange affronts to civility, right? To normal day-to-day life, where there's a riot that occurs because of some, alleged giveaway of PlayStations from some popular streamer. And then you've got violence and all sorts of stuff that's really difficult to curb. Something similar occurs in Philadelphia, and it just seems as though it's not even, we are unprepared to understand when these things will be catalyzed, how they manifest, and directionally where this stuff really, really goes. But we've also seen, and we've talked about this on the stream, Norm, one of the valedictorian of what's the school? It's not Cumberland. What was the school that we talked about? Anyway.
Yeah, I know where you're at.
And we've talked about this sort. There are organized groups within academia that harbor these sorts of beliefs that there is no two-state solution, as it were. There is no way that two groups may coexist, that notion is mutually exclusive, like that there is a mutually exclusive outcome, right? It has to be one or the other, and that struggle is permanent, right, within our small tiny blip on world time. And I think what makes me deeply uncomfortable about that is that we have been conditioned to think that it cannot occur in any of our cities. And I think that what I'm looking at on these screens is very easily reproduced here in the United States, right?
That's the thing that, and I hear you, and I'm worried about that as well. I'm scheduled to take a series of flights in the next couple of weeks. I'm heading out west this week, and then I'm going to be traveling up the West Coast, and then I'm going from there to Louisiana for business. And hopefully I'll land back in Connecticut at the end of next week after a lot of travel. And I wondered last night as I was going to bed, is this going to yield another round of airborne terror? Because I think that the Hamas invasion of Israel is quite frankly within the means of any group that is determined to raise mayhem. The use of a drone, the use of a glider, the use of the ordinary means of terror to disrupt a society. We're on the cusp, and then you look at the article last week that Newsweek did about surveillance of the domestic right, the populist fronts in the United States, and you get the sense that government's being weaponized against its people, and you begin to wonder how long people will tolerate that weaponization, at what point they'll begin to strike back. And I developed this notion of a world of flame, and crave for a craving for a sense of order, and that of course is the authoritarian temptation that people have warned against whenever there has been chaos, and those warnings go all the way back to Aristotle and Polybius.
And I have to say this because we spend time on this a lot, and this is the failure of the likes of the ADL, in my opinion, right? Any discussion that we've had over the likes of Ye and Ye's public statements and his rhetoric, his appearance on certain shows, and this debate over the limits of free speech, and also sort of the sensitivity to atrocities of history, etc. This sort of issue that we are now looking at in the Middle East, to me, has an inherent and sort of an existential problem to deal with here in the United States, and that is that the consistent and reliable appeal to some sort of latent anti-Jewish sentiment wherever you can see it, wherever one can imagine it, is a real problem that has turned people off from understanding. And I am one of these people. I can't pledge to understand the specifics of this sort of geopolitical issue. And that was my worry with you, Norm, is that if we got onto this topic, that I wouldn't have much to offer. And I don't want to pretend that I do. But as an American citizen sitting here and knowing that you and I have discussed any manner of the issues regarding the First Amendment, the attack thereon, the business of censorship, and how that model has been arbitraged in social media and establishment media, this sort of issue to me is made much more kinetic and dangerous because of how I guess boy cry wolf-esque the likes of the ADL and big media have been over nothing issues, or trying to turn people's attention or to otherwise cast them out of mainstream society, because that ends up being the most effective way to do so. That sort of misapplication of force, because it is force, results in a certain apathy, I think, sort of an ambivalence around this issue. But people will not be ambivalent when these things start to crop up in ways that they don't understand at their doorstep.
And so on that topic, let's pivot. I mean, Israel, we'll watch. I watch with horror and fear, because if I were an Israeli and I had folks rummaging through my communities with automatic weapons threatening to kill me, my response would be, not if I can't kill you first. And Netanyahu has promised vengeance, and I shudder to think what will become of the Gaza Strip. I don't think there'll be a permanent solution. I think this next round of hostility and bitterness will just end in yet another stalemate, and somehow life will go on in the Middle East, as it goes on everywhere in the world where there are tensions. But here's a prediction. The New York Times on Saturday ran a piece about immigration and what to do with folks who've recently migrated into the United States and have been shipped to Chicago from various points around the world. They're staying sometimes in police stations, sometimes on the streets, sometimes in schools. And not everyone, many are apprehensive about what's going. And yet, here in the Chicago airport, we've got migrants who've recently arrived saying, hey, we need housing, we need jobs. Well, you had them where when before you came here, and I'm not sure exactly what it is you expect me to do about it. Here is the issue: whether is destiny in the immigration policy debate in the United States. And just as in Israel, we're watching this cataclysmic violence of people with pent up frustrations going back many, many years, who've reached a tipping point and can't tolerate the status quo. What's going to happen in Chicago when we get our first 10 below zero day, and we have migrants living on the streets or in tents or flooding public institutions, creating demands that their basic human needs be cared for? How will Chicago react, and how will we react? And you're thinking, Norm, that's a hard pivot to make from Israel to Chicago and migrants. But I would say, is it really? Everyone wants a stable home for their family, and a sense of community, and a sense of identity, and a sense of an ability to thrive within their own skin and to support their people. Folks are migrating to the United States in record numbers, we're told, because of the lack of an ability to meet those needs at home, and a perception that the United States is a place where those needs can be met. But you look at the film that's on the screen here of recent migrants protesting. We need jobs, we need homes, and then you look at a tired America looking at those, saying, "What do you expect us to do about that?" You need them, so do we. Life expectancy is declining once again in the United States, according to the CDC. And once again, there is a powerful strain of thought in this country that we can't care for ourselves. How are we going to care for the world? We're able to ignore these issues, much as most of us can ignore Israel and the Middle East. We don't live there. We don't travel there. If we do, we try to travel, and come home in one piece. Right now, global tensions are coming to our doorstep. And in Chicago, here's my prediction. In Chicago, in the winter of 2024, we will see the first eruption of something like organized violence, and it will be reflected around immigration issues. What do I mean by this? It'll be and I grew up in Chicago, so I know how fickle the weather can be there. I remember one day my mother and I went out dressed in sweaters. It was 50 degrees. The temperature dropped 35 degrees in hours, and we were worried. We were hypothermic by the time we got home. But we had a home to go to. These folks are going to be out on the street, and they're going to have human needs, and they're going to look at a society around them that they think is not responding to their rights, because that's what these posters are saying. We need this. We have a right to it. We have an obligation to provide it. Are tired people going to respond with generosity, or are they going to respond with indifference? And if they respond with indifference, are these new Palestinians here? And it's a bad analogy, because after all, they've not been displaced from their home. They're coming here demanding a home among us, but they are at the margins of our society. Are they simply going to say, okay, we'll freeze to death? Or are they going to try to take what they think is theirs? And if they try to take what they think is theirs, how are folks from whom it's being taken going to react? And so my prediction, I do expect organized violence in Chicago in the summer or in the winter of 2024. And I think that's going to set the tone for our discussions of immigration policy in 2024 and beyond, because right now we're just ignoring the problem. We're pretending that we have infinite resources and that we need these folks to come into the country to replace, to fill vacant jobs and whatnot. But there are more of them than our cities can accommodate. We're ignoring the problem, pretending it'll go away if we don't pay attention to it. Come winter, we're going to have to pay attention to it. And I say Chicago will be the great asset test. And the events in Chicago will set the tone for our immigration debate to come in years to come. And we'll have to decide, are we prepared to respond as though resources were not an issue? Or are we going to say to some folks, you can stay and you can't? And are we going to say to others, as President Biden has apparently reluctantly come to the conclusion, there's a wall and you're on the other side of it? Now, candidly, that makes me uncomfortable to say, there's a wall, you can't come in here. But I'm also uncomfortable by looking at these folks. I guess I don't know if it's the airport in Chicago. I'm also uncomfortable at looking at people who've decided that this is a society that owes them something. and therefore I owe them something. And so there's a sense of tension. My ideals of being a resident of a generous country that has ideas of respect for all. That's
funny Freudian slip there, by the way.
What's that?
That's that funny Freudian slip there, by the way. Country versus company.
Yeah, there is that. So I, take a look at Chicago. I think the winter is coming. To use that old line.
I think that's a great point, Norm. Most of us who live, south of the Mason-Dixon line can't really imagine the sustained winter of those Midwestern states and up north. But I think that's fair, because what it will do is really accelerate the pressures of people there. It will become a humanitarian issue rather than a simple. Right now, if we're looking at this just on the spectrum of who has more leverage politically or otherwise, these people are already here. And what I would imagine is going to happen is that if we start to see some sort of some decline in the health of these people because they're not getting the resources that they need to simply survive, that will be used as a cudgel against those whose complaints and whose petitions on this issue are well heard and well founded. And it'll be used to tell them that they are, that they are somehow bigoted and that this is their fault and this is violence against those people who, and by the way, these people just decided that they wanted to be here. Right? No, I know. And that's the real issue that we have ultimately at bottom, is that these people just made a unilateral decision that they wanted to be here. Now they're here. And, there was never any sort of consensus gained on those whose communities will be affected. Jeff from Connecticut says, I was thinking about the CUNY law graduate speech recently, Fatima Musa Muhammad, shaking my head. That's the exact reference I was looking for. Thank you, Jeff, for that. But this is what I mean, is that this stuff is already very domestic, this adversarial relationship. And I think that all of us, if we have a well-rounded friend group, have friends that can't necessarily engage substantively on some of these foundational issues. I'm certainly one of those people. I have people in my life who are Jewish. I have people in my life who are Palestinian, and I will be very clear that with you, Norm, and with those watching, that this is a very real world problem. This is a very real world issue. It is existential in nature. Very tough, very, very tough to negotiate in the real world, even at a recreational or sort of a personal level.
As is the immigration issue. I think we're going to be facing fundamental choices about who we are and what we are as a people. There was a fascinating there's a fascinating new book out that let's see if I can find it here so I could. It's about Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, and I'm drawing a blank on the fourth, and it's called The End of Reality. And I recommend it all to you. The End of Reality, how 4 billionaires are selling a fantasy future of the metaverse, Mars, and crypto. It's by Jonathan Taplin. And the Taplin, among the many topics he develops here, in his attack on these technocrats. His view is these technocrats are trying to create an authoritarian vision of the future in which data governs, and we lose our sense of significance. And he's got a quote in there that I wondered about last night, and it made me think less of myself. And that is, when it comes to AI-driven warfare conducted by bots, where we don't see the casualties that we impose. He said, do we really want to live in such a world? And, and his rhetorical, the way he sets the question up is you're supposed to say, of course I don't want to live in that world. But from my perspective, I thought, I really don't want to see the civilization's dirty work conducted on primetime television. I want these problems to go away. I don't want to be assaulted on the street by images of abject need in the form of an immigrant without a place to go for the winter, and be forced to ask myself, why am I not willing to open my home's door to them? It makes me uncomfortable to have those thoughts. And so I'd much rather those problems be taken care of in ways that I not become aware of them, so that I can have my illusions and my sense of security, my illusion of being a good person and my sense of security at the same time. And I think most of us are like that.
So I recommend the book to you. Did you? And by the way, Mike, I was at a dinner yesterday, and I learned something interesting. Did you know that Peter Thiel has started, and some other investors, a new university in Austin, Texas, University of Austin?
Oh,
I didn't either, and somehow this escaped me. One of my clients is a Yale researcher, and he made me aware of it, and the massive recruitment efforts that are going on at University of Austin, in Austin, Texas, not University of Texas at Austin, but University of Austin in Austin, Texas. They're trying to recruit distinguished faculty from universities who are fed up with cancel culture and the PC ethos that drives academic discussion. And they're having some success. And so their first class entered in the fall, just a month ago. They've attracted a former president of St. John's, the classics program that has a campus at Annapolis and in Santa Fe. And I want to know more about this place all of a sudden. I think that we're all groping for a sense of reality, for a sense of being grounded in a tradition larger than ourselves. And as our culture continues to disintegrate and dissolve, and we see these open conflicts between people with warring points of view, I think our sense, and your sense, Mike, my sense is our educational institutions fail us. Because what they do is they take sides rather than seeking to understand divisions. And I have some hope that the University of Austin will help address this problem. We will report more on it as we learn more.
Yeah, this is great. I definitely am going to take some time this evening and try to look into this a little more. As you know, I think one of the first questions you ever asked me is, what's a recent book you've read that you commend? And mine is Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, right? Notes on startups, entrepreneurship, and how to build the future. And through that lens, I will approach some research on the university.
Take a look at the end of reality, because I like Elon Musk in general, but I'm fearful of the technocratic, the technocratic illusion, the notion that somehow we can solve our problems with big data. So take a look, folks. I recommend highly, and I encourage you to read it and then give us your comments, because it's a critical perspective on Musk, Thiel, and company. The End of Reality, again, how 4 billionaires are selling a fantasy future of the metaverse, Mars, and crypto by Jonathan Taplin. That's the book recommendation of the week.
I wanted to bring this, what I've got on the screen here. I'm thinking of Ron Coleman this morning. Ron politely declined to co-host this week. This is not a great week. So my thoughts are with him. I think that we've had him on so many times. I've lost count at this point, Norm. But what I have on the screen is emblematic of what we're as a country about to begin dealing with. I think that maybe this is some silver lining, right? If one is able to look at things that way. But Chuck Schumer says, I can't think of anything more ill-timed and cold-hearted than today's demonstration in Times Square. We've seen unprecedented viciousness coming from Hamas aimed at innocent families and children. Everyone, no matter your views, should condemn this brutal act. Ron Coleman responds, I just unironically retweeted you. That's how bad things are.
What what happened at Times Square? I'm ignorant.
That was the reference I was making to this UNY law grad. That there are groups state to state, and if someone in the chat has the actual group name, I don't want to misrepresent it, but there is a pro-Palestinian group, sort of a group focused on the on whatever solution one would assume there to be, but the long held sort of attrition of the Palestinian state as against the state of Israel. And they announced a protest in New York City. I think it was held on Saturday. And then I think there was also the announcement of one in Florida I saw where Laura Loomer was also reporting on that as well.
In support of Hamas, is that it?
I don't know if it's necessarily in support of Hamas. I don't want to attribute opinions to the group that do not exist. However, it is difficult to disentangle those two issues, right?
From the surface. Until Ilhan Omar and the squad come out in support of Hamas. I mean, this is where this rhetoric leads. Let's see if they have let's see if they can walk it back some. I think it is ironic that that Ron Coleman is unironically retweeting Chuck Schumer.
I agree. This is the one thing we didn't get to, which we will this week, I'm sure, maybe tomorrow before you head out. But this is from the New York Sun. It's an editorial about the move that Trump has made in the DC case to dismiss the criminal case against him, among other things, for sort of that sovereign immunity.
Well, but he's the jump headline talks about double jeopardy. What are they talking about? Double jeopardy?
Because it's a reference to the impeachment inquiries that he survived, the not guilty, and so it references a 2000 era memo.
No, that's just stupid. I mean,
I think what it does is what it's trying to do is provide a parallel for what Jack Smith is presenting in the criminal case to the cases brought against Trump during his presidency. And then a look back of 20 years, I think there's a memo from the DOJ at that time that tried to parse this issue, and it's somewhat neutral. So that's that.
Take a look at it, but that, just as a matter of intellectual hygiene, this is not a double jeopardy issue, and trying to fit it in that cabin just makes a mockery of the law. But hey, what else is new? A quick aside, a quick report. I know some of you get a little tired of our sports talk. The Law and Legitimacy League had an unexpectedly turbulent weekend. Mike's team suffered its second consecutive loss. I'm on the ropes, but for a miraculous performance of a few of my players, Dawn McNeil may have driven a dagger into the hopes of the objectors to remain undefeated this season. But we retain our hope, and we remain hopeful. And until those results come in around midnight tonight, we're fighting to the end. So go objectors. Thank you for listening, folks. We'll be back tomorrow at 8. Mike, how do people find us?
They can find us on X at LawPod Daily. That seems like the best one. This is where you can hit the notification bell. You can watch our live streams every morning, as you can do on Rumble Video. I want to thank you, T-Girl, for informing us that perhaps Viva Frey does want to interview you, Norm. So we're going to pursue that a little bit this week and see if we can't get something organized. If there is a genuine inquiry there, I think that would be a great platform for us. You can also find us on YouTube Live at LawPod Daily. If you don't find us live, you can always find our audio-only episodes uploaded to wherever you find podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, Audible. Please leave us 5 stars and a positive comment, or just leave us alone. Norm, I'm looking forward to continuing this week.
Yes, and those of you on the West Coast, I will be performing Sunday night at an as yet undisclosed comedy club in Hollywood. If you are in the Southern California area and want to know how to find tickets, send us a private note. I'll let you know. A number of haters have expressed an interest in boycotting it for fear that I'll once again lower my drawers and use the N-word. And you know what? I just might.
That's what I was hoping you were going to say. All right, everybody. Have a great start to the week. Norm, I'll see you tomorrow morning.
Yeah, you will.
All right, bye.